Still stuck in the 80s, Yo-Yo and May have to go to Afterlife in order to try and get Yo-Yo's powers back with the help of Daisy's mother in order to stop the Zephyr from continuously time skipping. So this episode was great because we've revisited yet another one of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s memories, revisiting Afterlife and Daisy's mother, who, you know, were big mainstays of the second season, the first and second seasons, as we learned about Daisy and as she discovered her powers. So this was really great to kind of revisit that on this last season as we're going down the road of revisiting all these little S.H.I.E.L.D. things. And so I just really enjoyed that aspect of it. And I also kind of like that it wasn't Daisy having to, you know, play around pretending that, you know, trying to come up with some story about why she's not her daughter or something like that. I like that they avoided that part altogether. They just went with Yo-Yo and May went down there and just kind of left Daisy out of it. So I did enjoy this episode for that, and I also enjoyed that it was a focus on just May and Yo-Yo, which is something I've only just kind of noticed that, like, last episode was big focused on Deke and Mac, and then we've had a few episodes where we get big focuses on pairs of characters. So I just like that, especially with this being the last season. We get a little bit more time with each of the individual characters, getting a little bit more, filling in a little bit more of the gaps. Like this episode, we learn a little bit more about Yo-Yo and her past, and particularly what led to her kind of the things that kind of motivate her and her powers, or that she's thinking about when she's using her powers, which we learn in this episode, so spoilers, that she, you know, that her problem with her powers that she's been having this season have always been in her mind, which I think some of us kind of had a feeling of, that it was some kind of like fear in her. And so that her and May having to work through that in this episode is great, because, you know, this whole season's been fun with having May having to be a little more emotional, this completely different take on, you know, the character who she's been through the whole season, but at the same time still being able to be exactly May, if that makes sense, having these emotions but still coming off in a May way. It's just really great. And so seeing her and Yo-Yo isn't exactly the, you know, touchy-feely type about her feelings, not wanting to talk about it either. So it was really kind of fun to spend this episode with these two paired together, pretty much trying to work through psychological issues about their feelings and expressing their feelings. And how do they do that? They decided to spar instead of meditate, which again, it's very much who these two characters are. That's how they would work through emotions, as opposed to, you know, sitting down and straight up talking about it. They're gonna get the blood flowing, so that things just kind of literally pop into your head, so that you kind of have to address it. And so in this one, we learn again more about Yo-Yo's past and the different things that have pretty much been giving her a little bit like a psychological block, in a sense, this season from being able to use her powers. But thankfully, by the end of the episode, with just a certain little line about bouncing back, she's able to, you know, finally overcome that block. And we also discover that she's not actually a yo-yo. And that's that she doesn't actually have to bounce back with her abilities. She can just go somewhere really quickly, as opposed to having to bounce back every time. And that was part of this, you know, this limitation that she had almost given herself in her whole life, thinking that she had to bounce back, as opposed to having to or being able to just go somewhere really quickly. So that was a fun little add-in. And I also like that they kind of saved that kind of thing for now, as opposed to earlier in the show. I'm really glad they didn't do it earlier in the show. I think it would have taken away from A, the nickname of Yo-Yo, but B, it just would have made the character's power, I feel, less interesting, which, you know, technically in this case it is, but we're getting enough to the end of the season now that it's not too much of like a breaking point, if that makes sense. It's just not too overpowered by this. It's just, I like when superpowers have a little bit of a limitation, like the fact that Daisy could shatter all her own bones if she tries to quake too hard. I liked when they introduced that. They kind of ignored that in the last couple seasons since introducing that idea, but they did introduce it at the beginning of it. They've even kind of revisited it with Nathaniel Malik, who again also pops up in this episode, having, you know, dealing with that same ability, or same with problem of having the quake abilities of, you know, crushing your own bones due to the vibrations and et cetera, et cetera. So overall, I really enjoyed this episode for revisiting the past and for the focus on May and Yo-Yo in this episode in particular. But that's all my thoughts on this latest episode. Be sure to check out more of my thoughts on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in the playlist I've linked at the end of the video. Thanks again for joining me today. Subscribe to the channel if you don't already. Have a good one.